All right, everybody. We just finished up with Q Willey, the ATG Physio on Instagram. It was a tremendous conversation. My favorite part personally was getting the insight into what it takes to get to the elite levels of bobsled and how the elite within that take themselves to a different level and how you can go from maybe a mediocre or good athlete to get to those great levels. It was also really interesting to see what kind of weight room activities Q and the others used to get to that level and how he incorporated ATG principles to give him a little bit of an edge there. What about you, Steph?
My favorite part of the podcast was Q's insight into what it takes to truly become a great athlete. Being training for the Olympic bobsled team, it takes some sort of greatness to be there. And then also the communication it takes between practitioner and client. That was super. That was absolutely spectacular.
Yeah, we had a tremendous episode for you guys coming up. Q Willey, the physical therapist, Olympic hopeful, he recorded this out of the Olympic training facility. So I think you guys are going to enjoy this one, and stay tuned.
Alrighty, welcome back to another episode of the S&C podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Coach Carly, and we got Maddie Scar and a new guest today, Q Willey, a potential Olympian. This is really, really cool. Q, lovely to have you here, man. How you doing, bro?
Yeah, good. It's a pleasure to be here from the Olympic training facility today's show. So it works out pretty good.
Awesome, man. I'm pumped. Like I've stalked you. I've done the Maddie Scar. I've stalked you on Instagram. I've had a look at a couple of videos. I was on, like, as I woke up early this morning, I'm looking through all your reels. I'm like, man, this is awesome. I'm pumped for this podcast. So really, really excited. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Q. How did you get started training? You've got an extensive kind of a lot done in terms of training. How did you get started when you were younger? What made you get into what you're doing right now?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I was always really obsessed with like physical culture as a kid. I can remember my parents probably thought I was nuts. Well, in fact, they definitely thought I was nuts when I was like 6 and 7 years old. I would sit in front of the TV. And on Saturday morning cartoons, which used to be a huge thing back, that kind of dates me a little bit, but Saturday morning cartoons would be on, and I would be doing like push-ups and sit-ups and squats, and I'd see like how many I could do in a morning during commercials, and my rest breaks were when the actual show came on, but commercial time was workout time. And yeah, I mean, I remember even being like a little 9-year-old kid. I had like a little 6-pack abs and like biceps. I was really into it, and I always thought I wanted to go play in the NFL or be like a professional bodybuilder when I grew up. And so I was just always really into physical culture and training. And I mean, it kind of all stemmed from that. I just found such a joy in the challenge of training, and it never went away. And, you know, that was always something I did through high school. And that was a little less popular, I think. You know, when I was growing up, the weight room was still maybe a little bit more controversial in some sports, but it was something that I really found a lot of passion in. And that continued on through college athletics. Mostly played lacrosse in college, a little, you know, football here and there, but mostly lacrosse, and ended up getting a master's in exercise physiology and was an assistant strength and conditioning coach, and then that rolled into pursuing a physical therapy degree, and most of the physical therapy I do is also very much training and rehab. So it continues on, and here we are pursuing USA bobsled, so more training now, and I can't foresee any different future where there's not some version of training. I always make the joke, like if you know, say God forbid got paralyzed, you know, it would be like, all right, this upper body's going to be amazing. You know, it's like, we're going to find something to train for. Even if I only have use of my neck, well, this neck is going to be great. Like,
yeah, man. So that's something that you don't see in a lot of physical therapists. I remember being plagued with injuries and going to see therapists that were these old guys that kind of had a belly and would tear their hamstring the first time they went out and played hockey in 3 years. And you're this Olympic level athlete. How do you think that sort of plays into your ability to be a really good physical therapist?
Well, And I think, just to be clear, I don't think you necessarily have to be, a great athlete to be a great coach, or to be a great trainer, or to be a great physical therapist. And I think sometimes maybe I give that message, and so I just wanted to kind of clear that up a little bit. However, I do think that interacting with training regularly at whatever level you are at is extremely important. So, I think everybody's going to fall somewhere on a spectrum, right? Some people are blessed with good genetics that they're going to get more out of their training. They're going to yield better adaptations from the amount of work that's put in, and maybe, by circumstances have some other good favors jump into their lap where, it grants them affordances to participate in sport at high levels, and some don't. But at whatever level or age or disability or whatever, issues you may have, I do feel like it is important to continue to interact with training, to pushing yourself physically into demanding realms, whatever that might look like. Some people are really into endurance sports, and I'm definitely not. The thought of doing like an Ironman or ultra marathon, just like, it makes me like sick thinking about it. So, but that is a thing. Like, some people just derive a lot of joy out of that. And I think anybody who is pushing themselves physically will be at better position to interact with other people who also want to push themselves physically, because there is a major psychological component to everything we do in training, and the training demands that when you go see a physical therapist, a chiropractor, a physician, general practitioner of any kind, and you're met with resistance to whatever activity you want to do, and they say, oh, well, this thing, running, let's say, that's a really common one. Running is giving you symptoms, so just don't run. Or, take the next 6 weeks off from running, and then what? Like, go back to running after 6 weeks? Like, what? So I think, like, they're not like ill-intentioned. Like, physicians just aren't out there like rubbing their hands together like, watch how I can ruin people's lives. That is the complete opposite of what they're trying to do. But to have the wherewithal to understand that when you say you need to pull back on running a little bit, also knowing what kind of a major psychological stressor that might be to that person, and the amount of identity that you're just robbed them of by taking something that means an awful lot to them. You have to be prepared to replace that with something else and have a difficult conversation. And if they know that you also value training, that you also value pushing your body physically, and that having something that you cared about taken away from you would also be equally distressing, it makes that conversation a lot more empathetic and a lot more reasonable to listen and build trust and build like an actual plan together. And I think that's really where a lot of the skill set comes in for me, is just I push myself regularly. I've reached out for really large goals, chasing really high ambitions. So like, I get it. I get what injury means. I get what it takes to overcome training errors and injury as you get going along, and I know what it means to be robbed of things that you felt like you had a shot at. It hurts. It hurts a lot. It hurts probably more between your ears than it does in your knee sometimes even, and so I think just, having that training background gives you a foot in the door with a lot of folks that maybe otherwise you wouldn't.
Q, you touched on it a little bit with the working with whether it's a surgeon or a general practitioner or a PT, but like that empathetic or having that empathy with that client and professional. Like, I think that's probably one of the most important parts of someone's, let's just say, rehabilitation, that sort of trust and that connection that you have with that general practitioner or that PT or whoever it might be. I remember having my third ACL reconstruction, and I had a new surgeon. I went back to the old one, but just wasn't feeling the same. And this new surgeon, unfortunately, he doesn't practice anymore, but he was exceptional. He took me through, and he actually understood more emotionally where I was coming from and the things that I was going to be missing out on. And he knew how to talk with people. I think that's a big, big point, is having the ability to be able to use your communication as a general practitioner or a PT or whoever it is that you're going to see, a surgeon, a specialist. how do you communicate with people who are coming to you? Because obviously there's all, like I've taken the deep dive thanks to Maddie in one respect with Charles Poliquin. And he spoke a lot about the different types of like personalities, and there's the neurotransmitters, and you've got your earth, fire, and water, and metal, and all that sort of stuff. But you would have all these different types of people coming to see you. So how do you actually communicate with the different personality types? Let's just say they're all different personality types. How do you find that challenging, or how do you deal with that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And to your point, I mean, you can be doing a mediocre, potentially average, even subpar training or rehab program, and you may respond really well to it based on how well you think you're going to respond to it, based on the emotional connection that you have with your coach or your therapist, because there is some really powerful non-specific effects that come along with training and buy-in and belief in what you're doing, even if that program isn't quote unquote ideal. And really, I think it comes down to, we are yet to discover what is truly ideal to begin with. We are still, in the early stages of science, and it's been around for a while, and we're honing in on principles that certainly lead us to some conclusions. But, everybody's kind of an N of one, so to speak, and we're always trying to find what's best. And so I do think that the relation piece and communication is huge. And I think to your question now of, there are just a lot of different people, and every once in a while you'll get some folks and they're hard to read. You're not, this is an odd duck, in front of me, and I don't even know how to communicate with this individual. I think the biggest thing that I have found, and these come from a lot of conversations from some of my mentors, of asking really good questions. Once you get into the person's life, it doesn't matter, at least on the front end of things, how well you connect from like a personality standpoint, so long as they really feel like you're asking questions that let them know how much you care about their life, about their goals, about their experience, about what it is they're seeking from you, what they expect from you, what they are anticipating rehab to look like, or training to look like, or how they think this is going to go. Maybe they have, they've had a host of really bad experiences before you, and you're just the fifth person in line of a bunch of bad experiences as a last-ditch effort. And that can go one of two ways. It could be they're really hopeful because they finally found you and they've had all these bad experiences, and they're hoping that, like, oh, this is the one that might really turn it around. Or it could be the complete opposite, where they've had so many bad experiences that they're just expecting another bad one, and you're just another thing to like check off, the list of things that they got to do, and so you could be on the butt end of that in a bad way. And so, it could be a really negative type thing for you, where you just walked into something bad. And
Yeah.
I think there was someone, one of my mentors, his name is Derek Miles, who told me this. He's like, look, you are not going to get along with everyone. That's just how it is. You're never going to get along with everybody. And if you think and you try, I'm just moving rooms here, that you're going to always please and you're always going to get along perfectly well with everybody, you're setting yourself up for failure. And so I think, there are some folks that I just have to understand that maybe it's not a good fit. And you gotta be wise enough to know that, like, maybe it's just not a good fit. But I do think the biggest thing you can do is ask well-intentioned, genuine questions, asking them about their experiences, about their expectations, about the emotional roller coaster that they've been on prior to seeing you, and also fully unfolding what they expect from you. And as long as you're answering some of their heaviest questions and you're meeting them at what they expect from you, and then asking permission to explore new topics, asking permission to say some uncomfortable things, asking permission, to speak freely on certain topics. And if they give you that permission, there is that level of trust that you've built, that there's very few people I find that I can't find a lot of common ground with and make, a really positive therapeutic connection, so long as you care deeply about their situation.
Yeah, that was for me when I was sort of bouncing along from different methods of treatment. I remember going to a chiropractor, and I went in for sort of like dietary stuff and testing. And then I said, I've got this ankle problem. He's like, let me look at it. And I was like, sure, you did a pretty good job with the dietary stuff. You seem like a good guy. I remember going home. I was home for the summer from college, and I told my mom, I was like, man, it seemed like he was really listening to what I was like saying and he was asking good questions. And I don't want to take anything away from him. He's a super good guy, and he did everything he could to help me. But the methods were not something that would help. I was Graston and dry needling and rest and ice and compression. So I'm no hate on these guys, and I've seen you post about it. How do you think that a lot of these methods that often aren't as effective as things we know as such as building strength, and there's a place for things like this, but how do you think that these have risen to the forefront of a lot of treatment options?
Yeah. Well, quickly to circle back around to your experience with this other healthcare professional, and maybe, it sounds like you really felt that he was listening to you. I would say in that scenario, let's say, and this is going to kind of help answer your question too. Let's say somebody really deeply believes that ice and dry needling, Graston tools, massage therapy, cupping, you name it, is what is going to help them the most. Well, I even if I don't agree, I can't disregard that. And so maybe that particular person, and I don't know how you may have felt about it at the time, but I would have, if you felt differently, that like the Graston and the ice and the dry needling wasn't going to be maybe the most effective treatment for you, I would want to know that, because no matter how good I'm listening to you, like there's another level to listening where it's like, well, I understand your situation, but now I also understand what types of treatment or what expectations you have of me. And I think when you are met with people who, and this happens all the time, especially in the clinic, in person, it's a little nicer when you're meeting with people virtually because I can't put my hands on you. So there's already the expectation that there isn't going to be manual therapy because we're virtual. So they already know that going in, which makes it a little bit easier of a conversation. However, in person, when they do want that, then it's not something that I will disregard, or really, I also don't really try to hard change their mind if I can tell that they're into it. I just am very clear at explaining what the thing does and what it does not do to them. If we talk about it can create a temporary neurological sensation change, great. If that's what you need right now, I'm okay doing that for you just to show you that I'm bought into your process and that I'm listening to you. However, I am going to ask you permission if I can tell you about some other potentially more helpful ways. You know what I mean? So that conversation might look something like if they are asking for me to massage their sore quad, right? I'll say, okay, tell me more about why you feel like massage is helpful. And they might have a couple of other experiences in the past. Oh, well, when so-and-so rubbed my quad in the past, it always felt better. Okay, cool. Like, what do you think rubbing it does? And what do you think I have to offer you that's, special about the way that I would rub your quad versus maybe the way you would rub your quad? And like, I don't know, like just ask very curiously. Like, I'm not trying to like have an oh gotcha moment, but like sometimes if you ask enough questions, you get to this point of like, oh, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I just thought that's what you do. Isn't that what physical therapists do? And then, you can have that moment of like, well, actually, like I do a lot more. I'm happy to rub your quad. I'd also be happy to tell you a little bit more about what I do and maybe some things that I feel like might be potentially more effective long-term. Are you interested in that? And, I think most people are pretty open to that. Every once in a while, I'll be met with some pretty stark resistance where like, nope, just rub my quad. And I might do it, but I'll also let them know, like, we might not be a good fit, like, because I might tell them like, hey, I'm happy to to give you a little of this manual therapy and get ahead of the symptoms a little bit. I totally understand. It sounds like you've been through a lot. Like, I'm not going to invalidate your desire for this thing, because you've probably come from some pain and some trauma of some kind that, like, you might just need this today. Like, I don't need to give you a science lesson. That's not why you're paying me today. And you relate to the appointment. So maybe, you got all kinds of things you're stressed about in life. Like, I don't need to educate you right now. However, while I get them on the table and we start like calming them down, and maybe I'm rubbing their leg, it opens the door for me to kind of have a conversation about their life. And it gives me a doorway to figure out more about the person and develop a little bit more of that relationship with them. And then once I'm on that page with them, then I can say, hey, like, what other things have you tried for your quad? Why do you think this keeps happening? It sounds like you've had massage in the past, and, here we are again, getting more massage. I mean, is this something you want to keep doing again and again? Or do you feel like there might be some better solutions out there? Walk me through what you think those are. Or let's have a conversation, man. I want to chop it up with you. And, I think most people are pretty open to that, as long as you are asking it non-judgmentally. You're not trying to have an oh gotcha moment, and you're not trying to walk them into a corner and then, haha, I got you. You're just actually asking with genuine intention of where their head's at. Why do you feel like rubbing your quad is important? And, how many times has this worked or not worked in the past? And where do you want to go from here? And I'm just here to facilitate what you need, but I'm also going to direct you in the best educated, evidence-based direction that I possibly can. And it's, my responsibility to tell you that me putting my hands on your quad isn't changing the tissue of your quad. It's not. And what I do today is going to be temporary and probably isn't necessary. And there probably is a lot better things you could be doing. Like that's my responsibility to tell you that, but I have to do that very tactfully.
Yeah. Yeah. I can imagine the conversations that you might have might sometimes be a little bit, maybe hostile is the right word, but let's take a little detour for the quick moment. I wanted to focus a little bit more on you, and I'm sure that our listeners would, and I'm sure that Matt would as well, but focusing a little bit more on yourself. Like, there is a lot happening in your life at the moment. You're running for a spot in the USA bobsled team. Tell us a little bit more about your training programs. There's an obvious focus on ATG. You're the ATG Physio on Instagram. But prior to ATG, what was it that you focused on, and what kind of helped propel you to the position that you're in now?
Yeah, no, I mean, coming up through college athletics, I would say, it was a lot of Olympic lifting variations that I just happened to be in college realms where I had strength coaches who did like the snatch and did like the clean and the jerk. And so we did variations of that, heavy squatting, fairly heavy deadlifting, bench, overhead press. I mean, a pretty typical strength and conditioning program that you might, come across. And when I had finished playing, I had kind of seen Ben Patrick on Instagram back when he had probably like 2,000 or 3,000 followers. This was like 7 years ago. He's still in Clearwater, Florida. And, I just saw a lot of very unorthodox looking things and exercises, and it interested me because a lot of the athletes that were training with him were wildly freaky, had a lot of jumps. And I thought to myself, I'm ready for a little bit of a break, something different. I've been training hard this one way for a really long time. I just needed a little bit of a foot off the gas and kind of explore some other things. And I was in a place in life where I think I was just ready to explore and dive into a lot of really random training modalities. I was following every strength coach available on Instagram. I was reading every book I possibly could, and it was just another new weird looking thing that I was like, okay, cool. It's something different. Let's do this for a while and just see where it goes. And it was something that, I tried, and boy, I was terrible. I was terrible at like everything in the ATG program. I was so bad at like the step ups. I was so bad at like ATG split squats and like all this mobility under a lot of load type stuff. I was pretty bad at it. And I just thought like, all right, this is at least something super challenging for me, and maybe there is something here because I am so bad at it that if I improve some of these things, maybe I could get a little bit more athletic and maybe I could get a little better. So I think now I'm in a place where I've come to an area where I still use a lot of ATG principles. I use a lot of the same exercises, but I incorporate it with a lot of other types of training, sprint training, plyometric training, depending on where somebody's at in their season or where they're at in their rehab progression. That may dictate how much these ATG movements, and I shouldn't even say that. It's more of just how aggressive we're going to be with really accentuated knee excursion, or really accentuated hip type motions, or low back type motions, depending on where they're at in their progress. So it's a very big, important piece of the puzzle. But for me, I'm in a place now where I have to look at it through the lens of all other things that we know to date, to build what is, supposed to be the closest thing to truth we can get, which is tough. The mantra that I've heard many times from some of my mentors, and the thing that I say a lot is, I'm just trying to be less wrong. Really, because no one's right. That's for darn sure. We know that for sure nobody's correct, because if one person was definitely right, it would be the only thing anyone would ever do, and science would have demonstrated it, again and again and again repeatedly. And the fact is that, any type of training modality doesn't always work in all scenarios for everyone. And there's a lot of different ways to come at it. And so you have to look at this in the lens of, like, again, the N of one. Each person is going to be a little bit different based on kind of their mechanics or injury history, and to build them something that incorporates, the best of all worlds, I think, is a part of it. And the ATG system, for me, early on, a lot of what I found with ATG was it was a huge missing link that I wasn't even touching. And I don't think a lot of people touch on a lot of these really deep ranges of motion, and it does look funny. You see some of these things. I think it's probably why it catches on so quickly, and probably why it caught my eye, is because it does look so unorthodox. It does look so different, and people love novel, sensationalist things. But I do at the same time think that there can be value there whenever you do see, really weird things, not even from ATG, just from other people. I try not to poo-poo it too much, because there may be something there, even if I don't quite understand it yet. But I think that's, ATG has certainly given me, a lot of different perspective, and a lot of different, movement quality or movement abilities in some motions that maybe I didn't have before.
I really like the idea of just being less wrong, and the idea of N of one together creates a really cool idea, because you could have somebody doing a program that, in most people's eyes, is farther along towards the more wrong than less wrong scale, and magically you get better. It's happened to me. It's happened to so many people. What have you kind of found is your least wrong sort of training mix for you personally in training for bobsled and power and quickness like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I'm definitely still figuring out my process too, as you are. And, I think early on, I was just having this conversation in the cafeteria with some of the other athletes. Like, from the outside looking in, a lot of the athletes that I was seeing that did bobsled in the US were astronomically strong, super, super strong, very, very powerful. And what is talked about less is how fast you need to be. The sprinting component and the speed component. And so I think a lot of people, including myself, try to get stronger and stronger and stronger and more powerful and put on muscle and muscle. And then, you realize, like, holy crap, like this sled running downhill moves really, really, really fast, and you have to keep putting force into it. And so you do have to be very, very fast, as well as big enough to get the sled initially moving. So, I would say some of the things that I feel least wrong about, that's a great question. I think the biggest thing that I've kind of maybe been hammering on with a lot of the people that I work with and athletes, and even on myself, is to undershoot intensity more often than overshoot intensity. I think very frequently people think that to rise to the next level, to become, a pro athlete, or to become whatever level of athlete that they're aspiring to be, that you have to have this very rise and grind mentality, that everything you do has to be max effort, max, all the time. And to a degree, yes, you do have to be disciplined, right? You have to challenge yourself. You have to do things that are uncomfortable. But that doesn't mean that you need to be working at, our rating of perceived exertion of 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10 every workout you do, or throwing the most amount of weight on a bar just for the sake of throwing the weight on the bar because you want to go up. Well, my program says I got to be, lifting 90% today, and last week I did 85%, but my program says 90, and even though it feels like garbage, I'm gonna get 90 today, no matter what it looks like. I'm gonna just do it. I gotta adapt. I gotta force myself to adapt, and it's like, I respect it. I did a lot of that. I probably still do some of that from time to time, and that's my own fault. That's an error in training that I'm trying to make less of. But that's something that I think, if I had to say I feel less wrong about, more so now than maybe I did in the past, it's probably the fact that, like, you can undershoot a little bit training intensity pretty frequently and still adapt really well, and maybe even better than you would think, because you're not so fatigued every time you go into your training session. So less is more sometimes. And I think, to some degree, ATG definitely hammers on some of that. The movements aren't incredibly loaded up, which, at different times in a training cycle, that can be very important, just to move with high amounts of quality through large ranges of motion, to preserve some of those, mobility demands in joints and the muscles, and interact with your body in a slightly different way. Versus like doing heavy box squats or heavy pin squats at maximum intensity and effort all the time, But I think, that would probably be the thing, is that if you're going to choose between two weights, here's maybe just the analogy that we walk away with. Like, if I say, well, on this bench press or overhead press, 40-pound dumbbells feels a little too heavy for me right now, but the 35 feel easy, stay with the 35 and do the 35 with a higher amount of intent, faster speed, better quality movement. And that 40 will probably come a lot sooner than trying to touch the 40 before you're ready for it. And that kind of thing. I think that simply idea wrapped into that one thing probably kind of captures what I'm trying to say.
Matt's laughing there because we've heard this so many times when he was a kid. It's like, I got to get 2 hours of training done in the morning, and then I got to get another 2 hours in the afternoon, and then another 2 hours at nighttime. Like, I just have to do it. More is better. More is better. I was listening to something this morning on your Instagram page, and it was really, really insightful. You were talking about how you managed to get into the university training facility. You knew the code to the gate to get in, and then you lock the gate. A kid rocked up, and he's just like trying to find a way in, and he didn't do whatever it took to sort of get training done, and he head down, and he kind of went home or whatever he did. But what would you say would get people to that next level? So you're pretty much there at that next level of training, potential Olympian. From a physical perspective, we can talk about training, but more so from a mental perspective, like, what would you say is going to help people get to that next step? What is it that's lacking from your average Joe, and then you got your good, and then you got your great, like just greatness? What would you say would be the maybe one or two things?
That's a great question. I would say, first and foremost, it's going to take relentless belief in yourself. And that can mean a lot of different things, because just because you believe in yourself wildly doesn't always mean that you get the outcome that you desire. There's been a lot of times that what I thought was going to happen, or what I wanted to have happen, didn't happen. But I think if you are relentless in the belief that you have in your ability to attain hard things, to do hard things, I think that in and of itself will result in a higher level of discipline, in a desire to learn more about training, to reach out to people that can help you. I think that's probably, even though that's something that, I struggle with, and I think we all do, where we have moments of doubt, we have moments of lacks of confidence in ourselves. That's not something that, is unique to one person or another. We all struggle with that. Even the highest paid, highest level athlete who maybe in all their interviews puts out a front that they're the most confident, arrogant, athlete. That's what it is. It's a front. They're still deep rooted, lacks of confidence, and they feel threatened at times, and they lack sometimes the belief in themselves. Whether that's in private or in public, it happens to everybody, and everybody has a little bit different way of dealing with it. But if you can continue to rise above it and believe in yourself relentlessly, I think good things are going to come, and it will be a natural outpouring of all the other things that you learn about training, that you learn about yourself, about the positions that you put yourself into to succeed, because you believe that, you can. And it's the same when you're dealing with pain and injury. Somebody that really thinks that their body is completely ruined, that they'll never improve, well, you're probably going to stay right there. No matter how good the training program that I write you, if you feel like, my back is just, I just can't do that because my back. And the longer that you tell yourself that, the more true it becomes. And, and I get it. I think you can be realistic with yourself, but you also have to believe that you can adapt. You have to believe that you can grow, that you can change. That might look different from person to person, but I'd say that's a big one. The other thing is just maybe in kind of that same vein is just not losing sight of your values and what's really important to you. And there's going to be a lot of distraction. There's going to be a lot of people along the way to tell you what you should or shouldn't be doing and how crazy you are pursuing lofty goals or whatever. I think at the upper echelons of sport, and I'm like, and this isn't me just trying to be extra humble, like I'm still trying to make it. You know what I mean? Like I'm still on the climb trying to compete with the monsters who are here. Like these people are absolute athletic monsters, and I'm just trying to get on their level. Every day is that same pursuit, but it's to get to that upper echelon, you have to sacrifice a lot. And there's going to be things that you say no to, and there's going to be things that it takes your time, and it takes away from sometimes social situations. It takes away from fun in other ways you could be having. And it just kind of, if you don't lose sight of your values and what's really important to you, I think that will take you a long way, because at the end of the day, maybe sports aren't that important to you, and that's fine. I'm not going to make any judgment on you. That's your life, but if you stay true to your values and you believe in yourself relentlessly, doesn't matter if we're talking about sports, if we're talking about career, that's always going to be true. That's always going to be the gift that keeps on giving. And it's no different in sport.
So while we're on the topic of these people at the pinnacle of a sport like bobsled that is cut and dry, me and Steph played soccer, football, depends where you're in the world, which is very subjective. When you win or you lose, you tie. You could tie. Like it's a subjective sport versus bobsled being very. This is how fast you were. So this will be two questions. Is there any sort of training things that you see are very consistent? All of the best people do this. So give us that insight. And are there any things that have huge differences in between the top performers that would kind of make it seem like that's not as important as it might seem? Because some people are really, really this, and some people aren't. So what do you think about those two spectrums?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I mean, a lot of the top performers are very fast for how big they are. They are very fast. Speed killers. If you are a very springy individual and you still carry quite a bit of muscle mass, you're probably going to do pretty well if you can learn how to push a bobsled, which there is quite an art to it. Not always the strongest person doesn't always push the fastest, and even the fastest person doesn't always push the fastest. So there is a little bit of an art to pushing the bobsled, but all of the at least on the men's side of things, those who are the fastest pushers and the most proficient are very fast and very powerful. Very powerful athletes for sure. I wouldn't say there's even one particular movement that they're necessarily like the most powerful in. We have like a combine testing certain parameters that they look for. So you have like a sprint test. You have like a 15 meter, a 30 meter, a 30 meter fly, and a 45 meter time. So there's multiple timing gates. So you just basically do one run of 45 meters and you get those 4 different measurements from the one run, if that makes sense. Then they do stuff like a broad jump, a 16-pound shot toss, a vertical jump, a 3 rep max squat, and a power clean 1 rep max. That kind of gives you the base of like the combine protocols that they're looking for. But at the end of the day, like those are really important. You have to score a certain score on a lot of that type stuff to be considered for a national team spot. But whoever is pushing the sled the best and the fastest is probably gonna be the one that's taking spots on the team. And so there are like timing eyes that they have on the ice track, a little push track, and a little practice sled push, and to try to see who can pop it off the line and run it down the hill the fastest. That's kind of what it comes down to mostly. But yeah, I mean, there's guys here that are in like the 220 to 245 pounds category, and they're running 4.6 40s or lower. So a lot of monstrous, very fast, very bouncy. I mean, one of the guys here has a 44-inch vertical, like a standing vert. He has a 44-inch standing vert and like almost a 12-foot broad jump. I mean, just absurd. So if that gives you an idea of some of the animals that exist at the Olympic training facility and kind of like the type of qualities you need, like that's a
just for the Aussies listening. You said 245. Sorry, didn't you? 245, which is I think it's like 2.2 per kilo, 2.2 pounds per kilo.
Yep.
So that's like 100. Just for the Aussies listening, like that's kilos, a 100 kilo man running through brick walls at the speed of like, that's a cheetah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, like 110, 115.
Yeah. Wow.
The off season, there's some guys that put on a little bit more weight, but they can still move very, very fast. So, just imagine a very athletic, NFL linebacker who can run in a straight line really well. I mean, that's kind of who's up, in the
Does
mix.
weight play a big part in bobsled? So, like, obviously, you don't want to be too heavy, but you don't want to be too light. Is that a metric that they obviously weigh in on? Literally.
Yeah. So there is a weight limit in the sled, so you can't have more than a certain amount of kilos in the sled. Meaning, between, if say you have like a 4-man sled, what is it? It's either 200 or 220 kilos total in the sled. It's between what is it? Between the driver and the brakeman and the 2-man. Anyways, they have weight limits, so you do kind of have to play the game in a way that if your other guys in your sled, if they're all 240, well, you can't be 240 because somebody's got to lose weight. Someone's got to trim down, or we all got to trim down. But I will say that on average, like most of the guys are in that like 225, 230 range. That seems to be kind of the sweet spot for most of them, because you have to be big enough to apply force into the sled and really get the sled moving, because it's not light. I mean, I think the practice sled, even when it's empty, the one that we push in singles, is still like 136 kilos. So you have to like rip that thing from a dead stop and then run with it at maximum sprint speeds down a hill and jump in it without slowing it down. And, 136 kilos isn't like the heaviest thing on earth, but it's not super light either to be moving at the speed that these people are moving it. And so, and then it exponentially, it goes up in weight based on how many guys are pushing it, So for like the 2-man combos, it goes up to 170 kilos that you're pushing. So, I mean, it's still a fair bit of load that you're having to get moving at a very, very high velocity. And so you do have to be a little bit bigger because weight moves weight. A lot of the times mass is going to be important for moving mass, but you have to be able to use your own mass well enough to put it into the sled and run very quickly, get it accelerating. But yeah, I'd say weight plays a little bit of a role, but there is a limit. You can't just be like 250, 260 and expect to sled with other 250, 260 guys.
Yeah, Paul used to talk about that there's no relationship between how much muscle mass you have and how strong you are. But if you put on muscle mass, you gain strength. So just somebody's naturally 250 doesn't mean that they're like a bobsled.
Right. I mean,
perfect specimen for bobsled, but
right. To a degree that Charles Poliquin is right. I mean, I think that we understand that obviously if you have more tissue, more contractile tissue than someone who does not have as much contractile tissue, there will become a limit at what physiologically one individual is able to put out than another. However, the things that go into strength and speed, I mean, it can be the difference of like, a millimeter of where the tendon attaches on one person's bone versus another, that you gain a massive lever arm just in that short amount of space to where it does make a difference, and so, yeah, there's, and even like neurologically, pennation angle of those muscles. Like there's a lot of physiological traits that play into what constitutes someone potentially being stronger than another, even if they have the same identical amount of muscle mass measured on something like an MRI or a DEXA scan. But, obviously, if you weigh 195 pounds compared to the lean 220-pound version of yourself, the 220-pound version of yourself will be able to simply apply more force than the 195 version of yourself. And so I think that's kind of, a lot of the athletes tend to be on that a little bit bigger side because they've kind of maximized their physiological qualities as good as they can to be able to move a heavy implement very quickly.
Yeah, you never see an NFL lineman that's 185. They're all huge.
Right. Right.
So here's another sort of stupid question. How much do you think pushing a sled a lot in kind of the ATG system has transferred over to bobsled?
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard to say. I mean, I definitely don't think it hurt. I mean, I think I probably feel, and even at the rookie camp that I went to not too long ago, I think I probably felt really comfortable very early on behind a sled, especially in the first few steps behind it because of all the sled work I've done in the ATG program. I mean, with ATG, since starting ATG, I literally probably pushed a sled, if not every single day, like 4 or 5 times a week minimum that I push and pull a sled around. Like ever since I've started, that's like 6-7 years now that I've just been pushing and pulling sleds around consistently every week over week over week over week. So yeah, it definitely makes a difference. I will say though, there is not much that feels like a bobsled. Like the height of the handles, the position you have to start, how low you have to get, how fast you have to run with something that's gaining speed exponentially versus like a prowler being pushed on flat ground. I mean, imagine pushing like a typical weight sled, but like pushing it downhill and it's accelerating and friction is not fighting as much as maybe a typical prowler. And like you are trying to apply force while running at the very fastest top end speed you could imagine. So it's a very awkward position in a way when you first start, and it's hard to not just run with the sled and actually put force into the sled to keep it moving faster and faster as you keep accelerating. But yeah, I mean, as far as like my potential for injury from pushing the sled, I think I have built an extremely robust system because I have pushed so much sled that it's the last of my injury. Now I can just purely focus on the technique of it. I'm not worried about, like even just the other day, most of the time, like if you're doing pretty hard hits and pushes on the sled down the ice track, if you do like 5 or 6, that's a lot. Like that's pretty high volume of how many like maximum effort like pushes you're getting. And I think I'm at a point right now, one, because I'm still learning the technique, so it's hard to put out like the most amount of effort I can. But because that position behind a sled is so, I have such a huge capacity because I've pushed so many sleds in my life now that, I did 10 hits on Friday and wasn't sore, didn't really feel like that gassed. In fact, my last push of the day was one of my better pushes, my 10th one, which is absurd, so like, I definitely think I've built up a large capacity to endure the sport. Now it's just a matter of being better at it.
Why, Q, why bobsled? What kind of attracted you to, because it's not like, I mean, especially here in Australia where there's a little bit of snow, a little bit of ice on the eastern side of the country, but like, it's not like bobsled is everywhere. So what kind of attracted you to the idea of wanting to become part of the Olympic team or trial for the Olympic team in bobsledding?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. It all stemmed from a strength and conditioning coach that I had when I was a lacrosse player at the University of North Carolina, who used to do it years ago and just said I should give it a try. I'm originally from Salt Lake City, Utah, and Park City, Utah in 2002 hosted the Winter Olympics. And I remember, watching bobsled and thinking it was a really cool thing. It's funny because I had heard of bobsled at multiple intervals all throughout my life. Like I remember specifically, I must have been like, I don't know, 22 years old. And this was when American Ninja Warrior was kind of becoming a thing. And I remember there was a guy on there who had done bobsled in the past. And they like announced him. He was this huge dude. He did terrible on American Ninja Warrior because obviously like a bobsledder is not built to rock climb. He is meant to like, tear down a brick wall with his bare hands and run through it. And like, so his legs were huge. So like, if you're doing American Ninja Warrior, you just you're a different type of athlete. But I remember seeing him and it was a moment that I have like burned into my memory of like, oh yeah, one day when I'm done with, playing lacrosse and done with these type of sports, I'm going to do bobsled. That'd be cool. And then it was like the cherry on top when I had a coach at UNC who told me like, yeah, you should give it a shot. And then at the time too, ATG had like 2 or 3 guys who were, attempting to get into the bobsled circuit, training with Ben down there in Clearwater, Florida, that I remember seeing. And, so it was just kind of a lot of touch points, I think, bobsled kind of being whispered in my ear all throughout, random intervals. Couldn't deny it.
That's funny. Someone was just pushing you. I think you're talking about I think Felix and Adon Lopez. They're on Instagram. I think they were down there. Yep. Bulletproof back, man, I think it's his thing. He does some tremendous stuff. I've never seen somebody put so much weight on a back extension before.
Yeah.
I think he did 275 pounds for a rep on a 45-degree back extension.
Yeah, something like that. Crazy.
He's crazy. So one quick final thing, I think, because Steph has to run in a minute, but you post a lot about research on your Instagram page. Mm-hmm. How much do you factor research into your sort of programs and your clinical? Because it's extremely helpful. That's what's proven. That's what works. But then there's also the aspect of who are the people doing it? Who's running the program? Where do you fall on that spectrum? Because there's people that totally disregard it and there's people that live and die by it.
Mm. Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think this is probably unfortunately, one of the hottest, like, debated things. And it's really unfortunate because I think what ends up happening is a lot of professionals from a lot of different backgrounds, even physical therapy, chiropractic, even sport and performance coaches that, really hate the research because they, talk about, well, it's not practical or they don't do it the way I do it. And therefore it's not, as good or whatever. But a lot of that comes from people who don't read much. If you read a lot, and I mean like a lot, and you expose yourself to a ton of research, no one research paper is going to tell you what to do. It can't. That's not the point of research. And that's where people go really, really wrong when they're new and amateurs to reading research, is that they believe that the research paper was supposed to dictate what it is they do, and it can't. So therefore, we just throw it all out? Well, no, there's middle ground there, where if you read the body of literature on any given topic, say tendinopathy, what is all the research we know about patella tendinopathy? Well, there's going to be some papers that maybe explored something over on the left side of the spectrum, some kind of over on the right side of the spectrum, and you have to take it all together. What is, if you read everything you possibly could on everything that has to do with patellar tendinopathy, where does that land you at the end based on what you see in the clinic or in your gym, what you've seen work for other people? How do you reconcile that? How could you maybe tweak what you're doing to be better, to maybe match more in line what the literature overall is aiming at? And there's principles that we take away, not necessarily exact protocols that we take away from the literature. You might develop your own protocol based on, the best evidence to date that says somewhere in this bandwidth is probably going to be your most effective thing. Okay, cool. As long as I'm hanging out in that bandwidth, I'm probably doing the best that I know. And the thing that kills me with going only practical based is that your own practice, the way that you do things, is inherently going to always be biased. You are not immune to bias. Your own bias will always dictate what you do, and your bias is flawed. You have to accept that. Anyone, no matter how smart, no matter how many degrees you have, no matter how many years you've been training, your view and your experience is biased by your lens. And what you choose to do in a situation with a newcomer, or a new person that you're training, or a new problem that arises, it will inherently be flawed and biased. So the only way to curb that, or to check yourself, or to get closer or further away from your own bias, is to read research, and to hone in on, and the research is going to be slightly biased too. You have to be careful. I'm not saying that the research is always going to be most objective, but you have to take all the evidence available to date on a given topic based on all the evidence that you've experienced, and somehow find a way that those two things, can live in the same space and help you guide your decision making. And for someone to say that, we need to, that the research doesn't show this, so therefore it's, whatever, we're just going to throw it out the window. Well, that's really arrogant of your own bias, and it's also really ignorant because you probably haven't read enough. Because if you read enough, you realize, like, you guys aware of the Dunning-Kruger effect? Have you ever heard of that? So the Dunning-Kruger
effect. I recognize the name.
Okay. There's a graph, a really common graph with this, and it's basically that, at the beginning of your career, you feel like you don't know anything, right? Or at the beginning of a certain, topic of it, you feel like you really don't know anything. Then, after about a year or two, you start reading some, and you really feel like you know a lot. Then you become this expert, and in reality, you don't know anything. you probably know very little, but you feel very confident because you know a little bit to be dangerous. So all of a sudden, you feel like you really know a lot. And then as you become, 5-10 years down the road, more advanced and more experienced in this topic, you start realizing, like, oh my gosh, the more I read, the less I know about this. The more complicated and confusing, and I feel like I don't know anything. And I'm 5-10 years deep into this thing, and I know nothing about it. This is crazy. And eventually, your confidence will catch up, and you'll start, learning more to the point where you feel like you do have a handle on it. But even the most expert person that's been doing this for 20, 30, 40 years will still feel like there's this knowledge gap. There's still things they don't quite understand, but they've reached a level of comfort of what they do understand enough to make very good clinical decisions, and they're always willing to change. They're always willing to change. You never land on something and stick with it forever, because if you feel like you really have it down and you really know now, that's closing you off to learning anything in the future, and that's not how science works. And that's another thing you learn in the research, that people get frustrated when they're like, oh, well, 10 years ago, the research said this. I was like, yeah, it did say that, because that was the only tools we had available to measure it. Now we have this tool, which allows us to measure it a little bit more closely or a little differently. And it's not necessarily that something gets, very rarely in literature does something get radically overturned where it's like 180 degrees different. It's just like maybe a little bit of like a 20 or 30 degree change. It's like, it's still in the same family of principles. It's just maybe we get a little bit, more over here. And it's a funnel. We're just slowly funneling and titrating down on what's closest to truth. But the funnel is all still moving in the same direction. It's just slow, right? But to think that you can bypass that and that you know better is kind of that Dunning-Kruger effect of people that feel like they know a little bit and they're starting to get maybe a little bit overconfident, because if you really read and you really do your research and homework on this stuff, pretty soon you realize we don't know jack.
Q, I feel like that's a good place to leave it at. Where can everyone find you, Q?
Yeah, man. Best place to find me is probably on Instagram, the ATG Physio. It's just like, I need to change it probably because it's confusing, but it's _ATG_Physio.
Epic. Maddie, where can the crew find you?
Yeah, Score Performance, SKAAR Performance on all of the Instagram, still TikTok, to Steph's dismay, and YouTube as well.
You can find me at Coach Carly with the 3 eyes on Instagram as well. Q, this has been an absolute pleasure. I feel like we could talk for another 4 hours if we had the time and the battery on my phone wasn't running out. But thank you so much for jumping on. Thank you to everyone for listening. We really appreciate it. Please comment, subscribe. We're on Spotify, we're on Apple, we're on YouTube. And until next time, Q, thank you very much, man. See you guys.
All right. Thank you.